Let's be honest, modern medicine is broken. Patients are dismissed, doctors are exhausted, and mental health care is decades behind. So it's time to disrupt the status quo, to challenge a system that fragments care, dehumanizes patients, and burns out clinicians. I'm Dr. Georgine Nanos, and this is The Kind Revolution, a podcast about breaking old paradigms, rebuilding medicine with compassion and science, and reimagining what healthcare can be when we finally get it right. Because change is here, and it's starting with us. Welcome to the revolution. Welcome back to the Kind Revolution podcast, where we explore conversations that help us live healthier, more connected, and more compassionate lives. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Nathan Simmons, a clinical psychologist based right here in Encinitas. Dr. Simmons works with children, adolescents, couples, and families, helping navigate anxiety, relationships, family dynamics, and life transitions. He earned his doctorate in clinical psychology from Alliant University in San Diego and his undergrad degree in psychology from UCLA. Dr. Simmons is known for his interactive, solution-focused approach and for his ability to connect with younger clients by meeting them where they are and building trust first. One area where he's developed particular expertise, which is especially impressive to me, is working with teenage and young adult boys, which many therapists will tell you can be one of the most difficult populations to reach emotionally. And that is so important because right now, many boys and young men are struggling quietly in ways that parents and even clinicians sometimes miss. So, Dr. Simmons, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you so much for having me and for that great introduction.
Thank you. So before we dive into the psychology of teenagers, I'd love our listeners to get to know you a little bit. Tell us what originally drew you into psychology as a career.
So I think I kind of had like an unconventional approach. I always say like when I left high school, I was like, I didn't even know what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to junior college before I went to UCLA. And I took a bunch of classes, took psychology. And out of all the classes, it's the one that stuck the most for me. It came easy to me. It felt like I liked it. It was challenging, interesting. And I always felt like if I'm going to do something for the rest of my life, it should be something that I feel like comes easy, is challenging, is always different. I could never imagine myself doing a traditional 9 to 5. So I think psychology always presents that because no matter how many patients I see with anxiety or depression, they're all different. And so it's always a unique challenge. And I feel like every patient helps me learn even more. So another thing that's kind of in line with my values is this idea of constantly learning. And psychology, I think, just gives me the opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like I learn more from my patients sometimes than they do from me. So it is always interesting and challenging. And then somewhere along the way, you developed this incredible skill for connecting with teenagers and young adults and especially boys. And that is not an easy population to reach. How do you do this? You're magical.
Well, thank you. My wife would probably tell you it's because like I never fully grew up. So it's kind of like I I always joke, like, as you can see, like in the background, I have like Legos on the wall. I have, a part of me like never did the stereotypical like growing up. I like younger things. I like to be able to, still have fun. I don't feel like growing up and being professional precludes me from having fun and kind of meeting people where they're at. And I think that's always the thing that's been most fun with me. And one of the things I tell a lot of my high schoolers is that in high school, I tried so much to like impress everybody, have everybody like me, do what was typical and normal. And I think as I got more comfortable in my own skin, I was like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. And if I'm not the typical, 30, 40-year-old, it doesn't matter to me. And so I think that helps because I think it really allows the kids to be like, all right, this guy's relatable. He's older, and I can't say I'm like a young therapist anymore, but like he might be old in age, but he's young at heart. And so I think they kind of like respect the fact that I understand what they're talking about. They don't see me as like a parental figure because I can connect and know about what they're interested in, whether it be sports, video games, high school sports, just social media things, different trends where sometimes they feel like they're speaking a foreign language to their parents. They're like, well, how do you know about that? And I think that always helps bridge the gap.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the common challenges you're seeing young people face today that may be showing up differently than in previous generations?
So I'll probably say the biggest thing is like when I first started out, I feel like it was a ton of stuff with depression. But now I feel like it's completely shifted to I see probably like 80% predominantly like anxiety, whether it be social anxiety, generalized anxiety, just about anything future related, like politics, friends. It's just there's so much anxiety and just like kids struggling with uncertainty. So I would say that's probably what I deal with the most right now is and like an OCD as like a side part of that too, which comes about because kids want more control.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing is tons of anxiety, which will probably, you might even follow up and ask that question, but it's a lot of it is coming from like social media. And I know it makes me sound like a boomer, as kids would like say to like all my patients, but it's like to every old person, but it really kind of is. It's a different dynamic because of what it presents. It creates a ton of anxiety, and that's what I see as probably one of the bigger driving forces in what I see today.
Yeah, and social isolation, which just compounds it, I think. I call it like antisocial media.
Yeah, we're more connected than ever, but less connected than we don't feel close to people as much.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about boys, teenage boys and young adult boys. Do you feel like are they feeling just as much emotionally as girls, but do you feel like they don't have the tools to express it? Or what's going on with them? I have so many parents that tell me, my son won't talk to me, or, can't get a one-word answer out of him even. What's happening under the surface with teenage boys and young men right now?
So I do think while it's gotten a lot better, back when I was in high school, I don't think I probably would have ever felt like, oh, I need to go to a therapist. So I do think it's becoming a little bit less stigmatized, as a boy going to therapy. But I do think like the way they process it and the way that they're socialized is very different. Stereotypically, girls are always feel like they can probably talk about their problems with their friends, their family, and talking about it, I think, helps them. For guys, it is a lot of like when you see teenage boys interact, it's a lot of like pushing and shoving. It's a lot of physical activity. It's a lot of making fun of each other. So I think when they really have like a problem that comes up, they aren't even 100% sure that they can trust that their friends will hold it, let alone like understand it or empathize with them. And that's hard because then all of them are feeling the same way, but they're all a little bit too scared to kind of take that risk and tell one of their buddies like, oh yeah, it really made me sad the other day, because they're afraid that if they say that, one of their friends might call them out for just being weak or some other very colorful language that boys would
Yeah.
like to use.
Right.
It is a little bit of the same types of stuff. Like they're both very anxious. My friend, she practices in Carmel Valley, and she has a ton of girls with anxiety. It's just about different types of things usually. I just think that boys struggle a lot more trying to get it out, and they don't want to get it out in the same way. So when you said like parents feel like they can't get a word out of their boys, sometimes I think it's because parents can be a little bit too long-winded with them. And I think boys by nature don't want to talk a lot. So if they feel like they're going to talk about their feelings, they're going to be like held hostage to be like, well, tell me more. Why is this happening? And they haven't even thought about all that yet. Or the other one that they always agree to is that, like, if a boy tells his parents that, okay, I'm like depressed or I'm feeling sad, but then he starts feeling better, but then maybe like a week later he looks a little bit off, his parents are like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you sure you're fine? Is anything wrong? Because now they know that he's had a problem. And I think boys don't like that feeling that they can never, like, that was a week ago, I'm fine now. You don't always have to look at me different. So
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Do you think, what are some early warning signs that a young men or boys may be struggling emotionally that maybe we can't always pick up as easily?
yeah, usually changes in behavior. I mean, it's kind of the same for like a lot of people, but it's, I think, more reserved than normal, pulling back away from activities and things that they normally like to do. Because usually, if anything, boys love to, avoid the problem. So they'll do that with sports, video games, hanging out, television, their phone. But like, it's like a more pulled back version where they're not even enjoying those types of things. And you don't see them going out. Like, so if you have a kid who always likes to be out socializing, and all of a sudden he wants nothing to do with it, or he's not hanging out with his friends as much, something's probably up.
Yeah. And what do you, for parents who are listening, so we have lots of parents that are listeners in our audience, what do you recommend for them as the next step? Because a lot of them really just feel lost in these situations.
So I would tell the parents in that situation, if you feel like you can't get anything out of them, I would reach out to somebody. Now, most of the time, and I'll tell every parent this, is that teenage boys will rarely say like, I'm excited to go to therapy. There's a few, like a small percentage of my population that will be like, oh yeah, please look for somebody for me. I have maybe, of the 85% of boys that I see, there's probably like 5% that reached out and said like, mom, find somebody for me. I want this. The other ones always probably felt like they were somewhat dragged to therapy. But as long as they're not telling you that I'll hate you or I'll never do it or this and this, and like really like there's a lot of animosity about going, sometimes it's important to push through that, because once they get in the seat, even the ones that say, oh, I will come in, I won't say a word, or I won't do this, they usually start talking because they want to once they feel a little bit more secure. So a lot of times I'll always text the parents after the session and be like, hey, how did he feel about that? Because I know initially he wanted nothing to do with it. He said he didn't think he needed it. And most of the times they'll say it was better than he expected. And I'll always take that as a win.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so you're so good at being relatable, not just to kids, to teens, to adults, to everybody. How do you? What are some of the things that you do? How do you kind of do that with your younger clients to build that trust and relatability?
Yeah, so I think it all starts kind of just in that first session where I'll be honest with them and be like, hey, dude, tell me how you really feel about being here. I'll empathize with the fact that, yeah, he'd probably prefer to be somewhere else than talking to some random dude about how he feels. But then, usually, like, worked into my initial intake is like, I'll always ask kids about what they're interested in, their hobbies, likes, their friends, where they go to school. And sometimes I feel like just getting that history and just getting them talking is something that I don't feel like they get from maybe other adults. And I don't think many times boys are asked, like, what are you interested in? It's like boys talk at each other. Most people aren't asking them, like, hey, what do you like? What do you like to do? And then once they talk about it, I think this is where, like I said, me being, I joke like a big kid, is like, I know what they're talking about. When they talk about high school sports, I played high school sports. When they talk about video games, I still play video games to the dismay of my wife. When they talk about like some of their interests, I know these things, and as a result, it's kind of funny. They're always like, "You know about this video game?" I'm like, "Video games were around before you were even born." So it's funny that they think that they're like the only ones that know about it. So I think that kind of disarms them. And then I also think the other thing is
Yeah.
I'm very direct with them. And I think they like being called out because that's what they're used to with guys. And they're not like almost having to sit here and hear like, "Oh, how that sounds really tough. Well, how do you feel about that, buddy?" Like I feel like that's what they don't want to hear. They want to almost be like, "Dude, like almost like, why would you do that? Wait, what? You did this? Like, here's a better way to get more out of the situation. Here's how you should handle it." So it's a lot more problem focused, but or solution focused.
As parents, we're always trying to relate better to our kids. And, especially moms, we're always asking peppering them with questions, as soon as they walk in the door and they're like, I'm fine, leave me alone, or, whatever. What can we ask? What do you recommend to help us as parents build those deeper connections and have those more meaningful bonds and build that trust? Because it is hard because we're the first people that they tend to just push away, go into the room as soon as they come home and sleep. There's a lot of sleeping that happens.
Yeah. So what I'll say to that is it goes back to kind of like short and sweet. I think a lot of kids, when they hear mom or dad ask them a question, they feel like, all right, I'm going to be here for 30 minutes. And I think in their mind, they're like, well, I've just been at school for 7 hours being talked to. And so I think if any parent can kind of keep it short and sweet, I'll always encourage my patients, like, you got to give your parents something. Like, if you don't want your parents to constantly pepper you with questions, you got to give them a little bit of information, or they're always going to wonder what's going on and they'll jump to conclusions. But with the parents, excuse me, specifically, I'll always say just like, hey, try to get in and out, get your most pertinent question in, and don't worry so much about the other things and like expanding on it, because I think if they start feeling that they're not going to be almost in their minds like held hostage by a long dialogue, it's a little bit easier for them to open up quickly and then just take it and like run with it. And then they give you a little bit, be like, great, awesome, I got that, cool, awesome, thanks for checking in with me, and then kind of move it along. But sometimes I think they just think they're going to get held hostage for a while, and they just don't want it because they've been talked to all day.
Yeah. You talked a little bit earlier about the overwhelming amount of anxiety that you're seeing now. What do you feel like? What do you think is driving that compared to kind of the flip of depression that we saw much more of? And I'm seeing the same thing. What do you think's at the root of all that?
So I'd probably say like it's probably twofold. So I think one, again, I hate it because it's like what everybody says, but it is. It's social media is part of it, but it's what social media does that is problematic. So if you think about when you or I were in high school, if we had a problem at school, whether it be a bully, mean girls, mean boys, anything, the problem kind of stayed at school. Now maybe a bully could follow you to your home and bother you, but like that usually wasn't going to happen. But once you got in the house, you were kind of safe. Now kids, they're not safe.
Yeah.
It's they can get home and they can be bullied from afar, bullied anonymously online. And like that level of just constant worry. So then that makes them have to engage constantly with the internet because they're just checking on their phone, like, did anybody say anything? Is anybody talking about me? And then there's other things like, for like example, Snapchat has this thing called like snap maps where it shows where your friends are. So it's like you can see that all your friends are over here at like Jack's house and you're just here at home. So then you're wondering, like, why did nobody call me? What's going on? Does everybody hate me? Why was I not invited? So there's that. There's no level of like disconnecting from just all these kind of social stressors. Where usually before you come home and the only people you really interact with were in your neighborhood or your parents, you weren't worried about like the rows of people online or the troves of people online. And then the second part would be something that somebody told me at like a training years ago, where it's like this idea that kids today don't know how to tolerate not knowing. So when we were kids and you asked a question, if your mom didn't know or your parents didn't know, or maybe your small circle of friends didn't know, you kind of just had to deal with it. Now kids, because of technology and things like that, they always have an answer. So when they don't have an answer to a situation like social stuff, their future, it panics them because they've never learned how to sit with not knowing. So I think kids really don't know how to be uncomfortable with that feeling. So that's another thing I feel like drives anxiety a lot.
Yeah, and explain to us why that's such an important skill for mental health. It's almost, I would say, it's like resilience as well.
Yeah, you can call it resilience, you can call it grit. And because the world, again, it's not to be harsh on the world, but the world isn't always going to treat you with kid gloves. The world is going to be uncomfortable. And the great thing about like discomfort is that usually some of the best things that I've learned or improved on or happened in my life came at some level of discomfort or sacrifice. And so kids need to learn to like not hide from that feeling, because if everything was perfect, you have no incentive to change. And the world will change around you, but if you're not changing, you're going to get left behind. So I think like if kids don't learn how to deal with discomfort and all those types of things, they're doing themselves a disservice and also like missing out on a ton of experience, because you'll just like stay insulated for the rest of your life. And like, that's not an enjoyable life, which I think then leads to more depression, because you'll see all of your friends kind of
Yeah.
experiencing the world and you're just left behind because you're too nervous or uncomfortable with putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree. Let's talk a little bit about depression, because as much as we see anxiety, depression is still out there, and teen suicide is on the rise, and that's such an important issue to address. How do you see that play out in this younger population?
So I think, depression, just like with adults and kids, is kind of the same thing. It's this level of they feel hopeless. And as long as there's some hope, most kids will never do anything to hurt themselves. I think kids are very much at risk because they're more impulsive than adults. And they kind of do this thing in their head where they're like, well, if I'm 15 and my life sucks right now and I can't imagine it getting any better, and I'm probably going to live to be like 80, that's 65 more years of this miserable hellhole. So it's like, why wouldn't I just do it? It makes like logical sense. So you have to kind of help kids understand that just because like you're feeling this right now, that doesn't mean it's going to be a permanent state. And so a lot of the kids that I see with depression now have maybe been depressed for a year or a few months, maybe sometimes a little bit longer. So I'll always tell them, hey, when you were 12, did you ever think that you would feel this way? And they're like, no. So I'm like, why wouldn't this, like the same reasoning apply that maybe in a year or so, if you work on some stuff, you could feel better? So it's like, don't make an impulsive decision right now thinking like this is just how it's always going to be, because it wasn't always like this. So sometimes you kind of have to challenge like this quote unquote like logic they've created in their head of why nothing will ever get better. Because sometimes they will say that it'll never get better, nothing will change. And that's just fundamentally not true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's just yeah, they get very stuck and kind of stuck in these negative thought loops that are really hard to break out of.
And the really hard part is like kids are so smart, but I always tell them like, you guys aren't wise. Like you have no life experience. So it's like, I know that I've said to myself, probably this is the worst day of my life, or things will never get better, or that girl broke my heart, I'll never find anybody like her. But like, it's all worked out. They haven't had enough experience in life to realize like life works out. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about anxiety, where kids worry about like everything that's on television. And I'm like, you guys aren't old enough to realize that, I've been through so many different like catastrophes, and like everything kind of works itself out eventually. I'll be like, oh, there was Y2K, swine flu, H1N1, bird flu, Ebola, ozone, and like I'm still here. So, but to them, when they read it like an article, it's like, nope, end of the world, or something happens with a girl, end of the world, because they haven't had many experiences with like love and just life in general. So I think it makes them very like, and then the problem is they're super smart, so they intellectualize everything. So and that's very dangerous too.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, everything is. There's a lot of catastrophizing happening for sure.
Absolutely.
As if there are teens or young adults listening, going through whatever they're going through right now, what would you want them to hear?
Understanding that like it's temporary, but only temporary if you continue to like try to live life and do something about it. So you are right. If you do nothing to change your situation, probably nothing will change. If you have a mindset like that it's all over and this is pointless, then like, yeah, like but you have so much life left to live that why don't we try to think of a solution and figure out what we can do next, because most states in this life, like the only thing consistent about life is that it changes. So like let's take some action to see if we can help it change, and I say, like, it's easy for me to say because I've been through it, but I promise you that if you keep plugging away at life, you will have continued ups and downs, but there is so much to experience. And I've always kind of imagined, like, what if I would have committed suicide if I was super sad at like 12? I'm like, all the things I would have missed, like driving, college, my wife, my two kids, sports, travel, ventures. Like, I can never imagine that. And if I would have done that because a girl broke up with me, or because I didn't have as many friends in high school, or my parents were maybe the nicest to me at sometimes, or weren't fair, it would have just cut all this experience short. And I feel like experience is the greatest thing. So I always try to get these kids to understand that don't sell yourself short and like shrink your world. You want to make your world bigger, because that's always what helps things change. But I think, like, when people have problems, they retreat, and that doesn't help them have experiences that will make them see that the world's like worth living in. So you always want to make things bigger.
I completely agree with that. What you talked briefly about suicide, and this is another thing I want to touch on. And this is, such a scary topic for so many parents to even think about. And
Right.
they tend to be very nervous when that comes up as a possible something that they think their kids might be contemplating, and don't know how to help them in that moment. And a lot of misunderstanding is around the idea of asking people if they're having thoughts of hurting themselves. There's this misconception that it's going to plant the seed, which we know it does not. So let's talk a little bit about that as well. I think this might be helpful for parents, because it's that for them is obviously very anxiety provoking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it's hard. And as a parent, I get it. Anytime a kid brings up, like, which I think the biggest phrase I'll always hear from teenagers and parents telling me about what they say is, I just don't want to live anymore. I just want to die. And so understanding that there's like levels to it. There's suicidal ideation, there's intent, and there's usually a plan. If there's intent and a plan, then usually there's a huge, like, this is urgent. We usually need more than like, hey, I'll call a therapist. Like, that's when you go take them and you get them checked out, you know, at, at a psychiatric unit or anything like that, because they're in imminent danger. But now if a kid says, hey, I want to die, or I can't imagine living, or life just isn't worth it, while awful to hear and super scary, I always encourage parents, like, don't worry that yet is suicidal ideation. That's them being overwhelmed and not knowing how to express it. And they feel like, well, if I just wasn't here, it would be a lot easier. But a lot of times that vague suicidal ideation is stuff even some adults kind of say, like, life is too much. It would be a lot easier. I just don't want to wake up today. Those are statements that even adults say, but they don't want to kill themselves. So you still take it seriously, but I think kids get very reluctant to tell their parents if they sound all the alarm bells the minute they say something like that, because maybe that was just a kid poorly communicating that he's overwhelmed. So I would encourage the parents to dig a little bit and say, like, hey, bud, like, if you are suicidal, hey, let's go do something. But if you're just saying that because you're overwhelmed, let me know, because I still want to help you. And I can't help you if you want to, if you really want to hurt yourself right this minute, but I can definitely help you if you feel overwhelmed, or you feel frustrated, or you feel not heard, or just really sad. So I think just making sure that, like, parents don't shut down the minute they hear, I want to die, even though it does, like, it pricks our ears up. It freaks every parent out. And I respect that, because I wouldn't want to hear my kids say it either.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you for that. So, final thoughts. I think maybe if you could speak now to our parents and give us some pearls of wisdom. If there's a couple of things you want us to know about dealing with our how to best approach and coexist with our teenagers and young adults, what would you tell us?
I think the biggest thing is that kids will say is that they don't feel like their parents, well, they always say that you guys don't understand them. But I think when they say that you guys don't understand them, or that we don't understand them, is that we don't listen to them. And we never want to, like, have a discourse or dialogue with them. So I have to talk with a lot of my parents sometimes about, as long as your kids are being respectful and presenting things in a mature way, entertain a little bit of dialogue. It doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything, but don't just shut things down wholesale. Now, I know sometimes you can't always get into a long debate about why it's no, and sometimes no is just no. But I think kids want to know that they can have a dialogue with their parents. And I don't think they always think that. I think that they always think that their parents, I hear them say, oh, they're just going to say no. Oh, they're not going to change. They would never do that. That won't work. And a lot of times when I get parents in the session with the kid, because I'm like, I want to talk about these things, we see that the parent is willing to be flexible. And so it's kind of cool for the kid then to see that their parent isn't like some immovable object. But I also think the other part is try to find a way to be more relatable. Even if you don't understand some of the things they're doing, sometimes ask them about them, or show some level of interest in what they're doing. Even if maybe deep down you don't really love what they're doing, it just shows them that you're willing to talk on their level versus like talk at them. Because I think kids constantly feel talked at. Teachers talk at them, coaches talk at them, parents talk at them, like nobody really like talks with them. So I think if we can talk with our kids more, even if we're not always super interested in the video games they play or the shows they watch or the ridiculous like things they see on TikTok, it means so much to them, even that you're willing to tolerate it because they know you don't like it. It's the same thing with like relationships. It's like, I don't love everything my wife wants me to go do, but I do it because I love her. So like parents should sacrifice a little bit too, just like because I think kids feel like they always have to sacrifice.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathan. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I know our audience is going to really enjoy hearing everything that you had to say today. I'm so grateful for all the work you do. We have so many mutual patients. You have done so much for so many in our community. And again, you are really, your talents and your gifts are very much appreciated. And I'm, again, grateful to know you and to have you as a resource. So thank you.
Appreciate you giving me the platform to say these things because I love professionals working together. And as like a private practice person, I don't have the same community I used to when I worked for a company. It's always nice connecting with different therapists because we all can teach each other something and none of us know everything about everything. And so I think it's the same thing that helps parents be better with their kids, is realizing that we don't know everything. And sometimes we should defer to our kids or to somebody else because we can't solve every problem on our own. So I think it does take, that saying, it takes a village, and it does that with therapy as well. And I'll always tell my patients, like, I don't care if it's me, a preacher, a teacher, your parents, if you can feel better, somebody's going to have the message for you. So always kind of keeping that open mind. So I think as long as we're always willing to keep open minds and collaborate with one another, it's such a strong community. And that's something that I think you said it earlier. We don't have as much community anymore. It's like we're so connected, but we have like very limited community. We need to build like that back up to help our kids, and to help each other, So I love that you let me come in here and talk, and I hope we can do it again. And, if there's ever any questions any of your listeners have or something like that, they can always contact me because I love talking about this and trying to help kids.
Yes. Tell us how our listeners can reach you.
Yeah, usually the easiest way is, send me an email and of course say like Dr. Nanos sent you because, word of mouth is always better and I'll pick it up quicker. My email, I know you can probably provide it to them too, but like it's always easy to send me an email and then we could always set up a call, or I can sometimes just quickly respond through the email. I think that's the other thing you have to be able to do is like I pride myself on usually responding relatively quickly. And sometimes it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to answer a parent's question just to give them a little peace of mind. Even if they don't become like a permanent patient, that's okay with me. I just, I like to be able to help and give a little bit of quick hitting advice every once in a while too.
Yeah, you're such a valuable resource. Can people get your information from your website? Will you give us your website address?
Yeah, so it's D as in dog, R as in Robert, and then my full name, nathansimmons.com. And that's the easiest way to, it has my contact information, email, all my information's on there. So
perfect. So we'll include that in the show notes. And again, thank you so much, Nathan. And this has been an absolute pleasure. And thank you all for listening to the Kind Revolution podcast. If this resonates with you, please share it. And hopefully we can all continue to grow in connection and community and support each other as best we can in this crazy world of ours. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining the Kind Revolution. If this gave you something real, hope, perspective, or a fresh way to think about health, please share it, subscribe, and pass it on. Medicine won't change on its own, but together we can reimagine it and build something smarter, kinder, and create a system that truly heals. This is the Kind Revolution with Dr. Nanos, where science meets compassion and the future of medicine gets brighter one conversation at a time. Thanks for joining the revolution.